The autumn wind swept through the streets of Boston, carrying with it the golden leaves that danced along the sidewalk of Commonwealth Avenue. The prestigious Whitmore Business Academy stood tall among the historic brownstones, its red brick facade a testament to over a century of academic excellence. Inside, the fluorescent lights of room 304 hummed softly, illuminating rows of polished desks where 30 graduate students sat waiting for their advanced corporate strategy class to begin. Among them sat a man who stood out not for arrogance, but for his quiet dignity. Khalid Al-Mansour wore a simple white thobe and a red-checkered gutra, his traditional Arab attire immaculate despite the October chill outside. His dark eyes held a depth that suggested years of experience, though his enrollment papers listed him as a first-year MBA student. At 42, he was older than most of his classmates by 2 decades, but age had only refined his patience and humility. Before we continue with Khalid's story, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories that reveal the truth behind first impressions, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful tale. The classroom buzzed with pre-lecture chatter. Near the front row, a group of 5 students huddled together, their designer suits and expensive watches glinting under the lights. They were the self-proclaimed elite of the program, trust fund recipients, children of Fortune 500 executives, young men and women who wore their privilege like armor. Bradley Whitmore III, the unofficial leader of this group, leaned back in his chair with practiced nonchalance. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit tailored to perfection. He had that particular brand of confidence that comes not from achievement, but from never having been told no. "Check out the costume party back there," Bradley muttered to his companions, nodding toward Khalid with barely concealed disdain. His voice carried further than he intended, or perhaps exactly as far as he wanted it to. Beside him, Victoria Chen, daughter of a tech mogul, smirked behind her manicured hand. Maybe he got lost on his way to a cultural festival. Someone should tell him this is a business school, not a souvenir shop. The group erupted in muffled laughter. Khalid heard every word. He had heard variations of these comments for 3 weeks now, ever since the semester began. Each barb, each mocking glance, each whispered joke, he absorbed them all with the patience of a man who had weathered far greater storms. He simply opened his leather-bound notebook and continued reviewing his notes from the previous lecture, his expression unchanged. This only seemed to embolden Bradley's group. "I heard he's on some kind of diversity scholarship," whispered Marcus Thompson, adjusting his Rolex. "Whitmore Academy trying to hit their international student quota, I guess. Probably can't even afford the textbooks," added Stephanie Barnett, flipping her auburn hair over her shoulder. "Did you see him in the library? He spends hours there because he probably doesn't have a laptop." The truth was quite different. Khalid spent hours in the library because he loved learning, because every book was a treasure, because knowledge had been his ladder out of poverty in his youth and remained his passion in his prosperity. But these students saw only what they wanted to see, a foreign man in traditional dress who didn't fit their narrow definition of success. The door swung open, and Professor Elizabeth Hartwell entered the classroom. At 58, she was a legend at Whitmore Academy, former CEO of 2 multinational corporations, advisor to 3 presidential administrations, and author of the seminal text, Global Markets, Human Values. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her sharp gray eyes missed nothing as they swept across the room. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said, setting her briefcase on the desk with a decisive thud. "Today, we begin our unit on international business ethics and the intersection of cultural intelligence with corporate success." As Professor Hartwell booted up her presentation, Bradley leaned toward his group one more time. "Here we go, another lecture about being nice to people who don't understand how real business works." His voice was low, but not low enough. Professor Hartwell paused, her hand hovering over the keyboard. She had heard the comment. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she continued with her introduction. "The business world is changing rapidly," she began, her voice commanding attention. "The most successful companies are no longer those with the most aggressive tactics, but those with the deepest understanding of global markets, cultural nuances, and human dignity. Today, I want to challenge your assumptions about what makes a true business leader." She clicked to the first slide, a graph showing the rise of Middle Eastern investments in American markets over the past 2 decades. The Arab world has become one of the most significant players in global business. Yet how many of you have taken the time to understand the business culture, the values, or the individuals behind these massive economic movements? She let the question hang in the air. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Victoria suddenly found her phone very interesting. Professor Hartwell continued, pacing slowly in front of the whiteboard. Let me tell you a story. 20 years ago, there was a young man in Dubai who started with nothing. His father was a fisherman. His mother sold fabrics in a small market stall. This young man worked on construction sites during the day and studied accounting by candlelight at night. He had a dream, not just to escape poverty, but to build something that would provide dignity and opportunity for others. The classroom had gone quiet. Even Bradley's group had stopped their whispering. He started with a small import-export business, working out of a single shipping container. But he had something that money can't buy: integrity, vision, and an understanding that true wealth is measured not just in profit margins, but in positive impact. He treated every worker with respect. He paid fair wages when others exploited cheap labor. He invested in education programs for underprivileged children. He built hospitals in communities that had been forgotten. Professor Hartwell's voice grew stronger, more passionate. His competitors mocked him. They said he was too soft, too idealistic, that business wasn't charity. But while they were cutting corners and maximizing short-term profits, he was building trust. And in international business, trust is the most valuable currency. And she clicked to the next slide, a photograph of a massive corporate complex in Dubai, its glass towers reaching toward a brilliant blue sky. The logo read, Al-Mansour Global Enterprises. Today, that man's company operates in 67 countries. It employs over 200,000 people. Its annual revenue exceeds $43 billion. And it has maintained a reputation for ethical business practices that has become a case study in every major business school in the world. Khalid remained perfectly still in his seat, his expression neutral, but his hands clasped a bit tighter around his pen. Professor Hartwell turned to face the class directly. That man is Khalid Al-Mansour. She paused, letting the name resonate. And he is sitting in this classroom right now. The silence that followed was absolute. Every head turned toward the back of the room where Khalid sat. Bradley's face drained of color. Victoria's mouth fell open. Marcus looked as if he might be sick. Mr. Al-Mansour has chosen to return to school to earn his MBA, not because he needs it for career advancement. He's already at the pinnacle of global business. But because he believes there is always more to learn. He's here under his full name, which any of you could have found with a simple Google search. But none of you bothered. You saw his traditional dress and made assumptions. You heard his accent and dismissed his intelligence. You looked at him and saw a stereotype rather than a human being. Professor Hartwell's disappointment was evident in every word. This is the problem with American business culture today. We claim to value diversity, but we only respect it when it comes packaged in a form we recognize. We talk about global markets while harboring provincial prejudices. We advocate for inclusion while practicing exclusion. Bradley tried to sink lower in his seat, but there was nowhere to hide. The shame on his face was visible to everyone. Mr. Al-Mansour, Professor Hartwell said, her tone softening, would you be willing to share with the class your perspective on cultural intelligence in international business? Khalid stood slowly, gracefully. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, tinged with a British accent from years of education in London. Thank you, Professor Hartwell. I appreciate the kind introduction, though I must say I did not come to this institution seeking recognition or special treatment. I came to learn. He looked around the room, making eye contact with several students, including Bradley. There was no anger in his gaze, no judgment, only quiet dignity. In my years of business, I have learned that the greatest obstacles to success are not market forces or economic downturns. They are our own assumptions, our prejudices, our inability to see beyond the surface. When I walk into a room wearing my traditional dress, I am making a choice. I am honoring my heritage, my faith, my family, but I am also conducting an experiment of sorts. I am seeing who will look past the clothing to see the person. The classroom was utterly silent. Every student hung on his words. Some of you, Khalid continued, his tone still gentle, have spent these past weeks making assumptions about me. You assumed I was poor because I dressed differently. You assumed I was ignorant because I am older than you. You assumed I was less capable because I come from a different culture. These assumptions cost you nothing in a classroom setting, but in the real world of international business, such assumptions cost millions of dollars, destroy partnerships, and create barriers to innovation. He paused, letting his words sink in. I do not share this to embarrass anyone. I share it because you are here to learn, and sometimes the most valuable lessons come from uncomfortable truths. Bradley suddenly stood up, his face flushed. Mr. Al-Mansour, I owe you an apology, a sincere apology. His voice cracked slightly. I've been awful to you. The comments, the looks, The dismissive attitude, there's no excuse for it. I let my own arrogance and ignorance guide my behavior, and I'm truly sorry. The apology hung in the air. Khalid nodded slowly. I accept your apology, Bradley, and I want you to know something. You have the potential to be a great business leader. I've watched you in class. You're intelligent, articulate, and you have good instincts for market analysis. But intelligence without empathy, skill without ethics, success without integrity, these are hollow achievements. Victoria stood next, tears streaming down her face. I'm so ashamed. My father built his business through international partnerships, and he always taught me to respect other cultures. But I forgot those lessons. I let peer pressure and my own insecurities make me cruel. I'm sorry, Mr. Al-Mansour. Truly sorry. One by one, the other members of Bradley's group stood and offered their apologies. Each one was received with grace by Khalid, who understood that growth often begins with the painful recognition of our failures. Professor Hartwell watched this unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This is why I teach, she said quietly, not to fill heads with theories and formulas, but to open hearts and minds to truth. She addressed the entire class now. Let this be a lesson you carry with you far beyond these walls. In business, as in life, our character is revealed not by how we treat those who can benefit us, but by how we treat those we assume cannot. Every person you meet, the janitor, the driver, the assistant, the foreign student in traditional dress, deserves your respect and consideration, not because of their position or wealth, but because of their inherent human dignity. The remainder of the class session was unlike any other. Students began asking Khalid questions, genuine, thoughtful questions about his business philosophy, about operating in multiple cultural contexts, about balancing profit with purpose. He answered each one thoughtfully, sharing stories of failures and successes, of lessons learned through both triumph and humiliation. He spoke about the time he lost a major contract because he refused to pay a bribe, and how that principled stand, though costly in the short term, established his reputation for integrity that later brought him far greater opportunities. He talked about hiring a diverse workforce not as a PR strategy, but as a business imperative, different perspectives leading to better problem-solving and innovation. In Dubai, we have a saying, Khalid shared. The palm tree grows strongest in the desert because it has learned to find water where others see only sand. In business, those who can see opportunity where others see only obstacles, these are the ones who truly succeed. When the class ended, no one rushed out. Students gathered around Khalid, asking for his insights, his advice, his perspective. Bradley waited until the crowd thinned, then approached hesitantly. Mr. Al-Mansour, I know I've already apologized, but I wanted to ask, why did you just sit there? For 3 weeks you endured our mockery, our disrespect. You could have said something, put us in our place. Why didn't you? Khalid smiled gently. Would you have listened if I had simply told you who I was? Or did you need to arrive at this understanding through your own journey? Sometimes, Bradley, the most powerful teacher is our own conscience. I simply gave it time to speak to you. He placed a hand on Bradley's shoulder. You asked me earlier why I'm here, why I'm pursuing this degree when I don't need it for my career. The truth is, I'm here precisely because of moments like this. In my daily life, I am surrounded by people who know who I am, who treat me with deference and respect, sometimes because they genuinely respect me, sometimes because they want something from me. But here, I could be just another student. Here, I could see how people really are when they think there's nothing to gain or lose. And what did you learn? Bradley asked quietly. I learned that prejudice is not always born from hatred. Sometimes it comes from ignorance, from insecurity, from fear of the unfamiliar. I learned that people can change when confronted with truth. And I learned that you, Bradley Whitmore III, have a good heart beneath your privileged exterior. You just needed a mirror held up to see yourself clearly. As students filed out, Professor Hartwell approached Khalid. Thank you for handling that with such grace, she said. When I learned you had enrolled in my class, I'll admit I was both honored and concerned. Honored to have someone of your caliber as a student. Concerned about exactly what happened, that your classmates wouldn't appreciate who you are. You knew from the beginning? Khalid asked. Of course. The admissions committee flagged your application. A billionaire CEO enrolling in graduate school tends to raise questions. But you requested that your background not be shared, that you be treated as any other student. I respected that wish, though watching these past weeks has been difficult. It was necessary, Khalid replied. These students needed to learn this lesson now, in a classroom where the stakes are low, rather than later in a boardroom where their prejudices could cost them everything. Over the following weeks, the dynamic in room 304 transformed completely. Bradley and his group, once the embodiment of entitled privilege, became some of Khalid's most dedicated students. They asked him to lead study groups, sought his mentorship, and began to examine their own biases and assumptions. Bradley, in particular, underwent a remarkable transformation. He started volunteering at an immigrant community center in Boston, helping new Americans navigate business registration and financial planning. He wrote his semester thesis on ethical leadership in global markets, citing Khalid's business model as a central case study. Victoria launched the initiative within the business school to promote cultural competency training, bringing in speakers from diverse backgrounds to share their experiences. Marcus used his family connections to create an internship program that specifically recruited students from underrepresented communities. Professor Hartwell watched these changes with deep satisfaction. On the last day of class, as students presented their final projects, she reflected on the power of education to transform not just minds, but hearts. Khalid's own final project was a detailed analysis of sustainable business practices in emerging markets, focusing on how corporations could generate profit while actively improving the communities they operated in. His presentation was brilliant, combining rigorous data analysis with compelling human stories, demonstrating that business success and social responsibility were not opposing forces but complementary elements of a larger vision. When he finished, the class erupted in applause. These were not the polite, obligatory claps of an academic setting. This was genuine appreciation for a man who had taught them far more than any textbook could. After class, Bradley approached Khalid one final time. "I want you to know," he said, "that I'm not the same person I was 3 months ago. You changed my life, Mr. Al-Mansour. You showed me that leadership isn't about dominating others or proving your superiority. It's about service, integrity, and seeing the humanity in every person you meet." Khalid smiled warmly. "You changed your own life, Bradley. I simply provided an opportunity for reflection. The choice to grow, to change, to become better, that was yours alone." He handed Bradley a business card. "When you graduate, if you're interested, I'd like to offer you an internship with Al-Mansour Global Enterprises, not because of your family name or your connections, but because I see in you the potential to be a leader who will make a real difference in the world, someone who has learned that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the positive impact we have on others." Bradley's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "After how I treated you, you say yes," Khalid interrupted gently. "And then you prove that people can change, that one moment of clarity can redirect an entire life, that redemption is always possible for those willing to do the work." As the semester ended and students prepared for winter break, the story of what happened in room 304 spread throughout Whitmore Academy. It became legend, not just the reveal of who Khalid really was, but the transformation it sparked in those who had dismissed him. On graduation day, 18 months later, Khalid stood among the graduates receiving his MBA. He didn't need the degree for career advancement, but he wore his cap and gown with the same pride as the 25-year-olds around him, because learning, he believed, was a lifelong journey that knew no age limit, no status barrier, no endpoint. Bradley Whitmore III gave the student commencement speech. He spoke about assumptions and transformations, about the man in traditional Arab dress who had taught him the most important lesson of his life, that respect is not something you give only to those who you think deserve it, but something you offer to every human being as their birthright. "We came to business school to learn about markets and margins, strategies and systems," Bradley concluded, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd of graduates, families, and faculty. "But the most valuable lesson I learned had nothing to do with balance sheets or profit models. I learned that how we treat people, especially those we perceive as different, as less than, as unimportant, reveals who we truly are. And if we are fortunate, we get teachers who show us our blind spots with patience and grace, giving us the chance to become better than we were." He looked directly at Khalid, sitting 3 rows back. "Thank you, Mr. Al-Mansour, for being that teacher, for showing us that true success is not about elevating yourself above others, but about lifting others up alongside you." The applause was thunderous, and in that moment, as the Boston sun streamed through the windows of the auditorium, as hundreds of graduates celebrated their achievement, a deeper lesson resonated, that sometimes the most powerful truths are learned not from textbooks or lectures, but from the quiet dignity of a man who chose to be underestimated, knowing that the truth would eventually shine through. Khalid Al-Mansour had come to Whitmore Business Academy to learn, but in the process, he had taught a lesson that would echo through the lives of his classmates for decades to come, a lesson about character, about humility, about the courage it takes to see beyond the surface and recognize the inherent worth in every person. In the end, Room 304 had been transformed from a classroom into a crucible, a place where assumptions were burned away and understanding was forged. And the students who passed through it carried with them not just business knowledge, but wisdom that would guide them in creating a more just, more respectful, more human world. The story of the Arab billionaire who was laughed at until the teacher exposed the truth became more than just an anecdote. It became a reminder that in every encounter we have a choice: to see only what we expect to see, or to look deeper and discover the extraordinary in the seemingly ordinary. To judge based on appearance, or to seek understanding. To diminish others, or to recognize their dignity. And for those willing to make the right choice, the rewards extend far beyond business success. They touch the very core of what it means to be human.